Kiddie Viddie was a series of VHS tapes from 1989, each with their not-so-subtle veil of teaching good Christian values through MTV-style videos for kids. Think VeggieTales type of not-so-subtle. Now, Kiddie Viddie was a strange set of videos, but to the average viewer with no context, they probably wouldn't notice anything off-kilter. Sure, it comes off as low-budget or even camp, but at this point, what isn't from the 80s? What makes Kiddie Viddie stand out is its morbid appeal that could only be understood once you know the background of its production. And spoiler, Kiddie Viddie was made by a cult. The cult in question is the Children of God, but they've gone through many name changes from the Family of Love to the current Family International. But for the most part, I'll call it the Family. While the Family is a remnant of the new religious movement in the 1960s, they aren't household names like Jonestown or the Manson family. But that doesn't mean that they're not infamous. They're most well known for Flirty Fishing, and for former members saying on live TV,
"And I was ordered in the group to have sex with a 10-year-old.
And this isn't even touching the surface of how perverse and conflicting Kiddie Viddie has become the deeper I research the story. So, buckle in for a deep dive behind the children's video series created by a cult. If I were to say cult, what do you picture? Matching forehead tattoos? Nike Air Decades? Kool-Aid? What about terms such as brainwashing, mind control, or even Swifties? Cult is a multifaceted term, and people respond to cult and cult-like stories with a psychological rubbernecking response, captivating our collective attention and imagination. Cultish is a 2021 book by Amanda Montell that dives into the language of fanaticism and how words are the medium through which belief systems are manufactured, nurtured, and reinforced. Beliefs that function for better or for worse. Seriously, count how many days go by without experiencing fanatic language. This mascara has a cult following. The Room is a cult classic. Fanatic language doesn't even need to explicitly use the word cult. Take a look at how Swifties interact, and heck, even affirmations during a work meeting or Peloton ride can invoke a cult-like influence. According to Montell, cult has become one of those terms that can mean something totally different depending on the context of the conversation and the attitudes of the speaker. Experts generally agree that listeners are able to pick up the context clues around our use of cult, meaning that I can say Swifties and the Children of God are a cult, and you, the listener, understand that I'm describing two different things with the same word. Swifties are a cult in the sense that it illustrates the fan base fierce devotion to Taylor Swift, but when I say the Children of God are a cult, I mean it's a small religious organization with a self-appointed leader that exerted control over his followers based on his own set of unorthodox beliefs. Montell states that there is no one shared definition of cult, but rather that it exists on a spectrum that ranges from healthy and constructive to unhealthy and destructive. To rank the Family, they're about here, just short of mass suicide, but above Kabbalah. So how did the Family tread the destructive qualities of a cult while also producing a wholesome VHS series? Like the book of Genesis, we must start in the beginning. And in the beginning, there was a man, his libido, and the apocalypse. David Berg was the founder and head of the Family from its inception in 1968 until his death in 1994. His mother is Virginia Brandt Berg, and before birthing said cult leader, she was a famous preacher and early raid evangelist. Virginia's main claim to fame was by billing herself as the Miracle Woman. And as the story goes, an accident left Virginia paralyzed for 5 years, and she was so severely injured that she weighed only 78 pounds. Then, one day, the big man himself miraculously healed Mrs. Berg, and before you know it, Virginia's from deathbed to pulpit sermon made her an evangelical star. This was the environment David Berg was born and raised into. Before becoming a cult leader, he hopped around the country from one gig to the other and couldn't really catch a break. With a family to feed and down on his luck after the Berg family singers flopped, they moved back home with Mama Berg by Christmas 1967. And where was their new home? Huntington Beach, California, which by then was beaming with sunshine, waves, dilapidated surfers, and long-haired youngsters strung out on the pier. By then, Virginia was spending her twilight years developing a small ministry to the sea of lost souls ready to be saved along the California coast. And who were these souls? Hippies. And lots of them. Mama Berg was a beloved figure in the seaside during her final years. She was known for roving around in an electric cart and distributing free peanut butter sandwiches to this group of unloved and unwanted hippies and society dropouts. But something Virginia Berg would not have been able to anticipate is that she was participating in the ministry of the earliest inception of the Jesus Freaks, which was the fusion of the counterculture and Christian revitalization. Author Don Lattin writes about this in his book about the rise and fall of the children of God. He states that to many Americans, the Jesus Freaks were a contradiction in terms. The counterculture was supposed to be about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Evangelicals were supposed to be about piety and sexual purity, but evangelical Christians, especially before the rise of the religious right and its alliance with the Republican Party in the late 70s, were countercultural. Virginia Berg would never see this come to light after passing away in 1968, but her son would take full advantage of inserting himself and his corrupted ideology right in the middle of it. At 49 years old, Berg found a lot in common with the congregation half his age. Years of feeling left behind by the establishment left him with a compelling message for his young audience, which was a radical denunciation of the system. And the system here meaning churches, governments, age of consent laws, and generally anything that made Berg feel wrong during his lifetime. It was easy to reject the system when you combined it with this coinciding prophecy that the apocalypse was coming. Why bother with getting a job or securing a pension when the end times were near? According to Lattin, David Berg started sounding like a prophet, not an assistant pastor stuck in his mother's shadow. By 1971, the Children of God had developed a reputation as being a sex, drugs, and rock and roll rehabilitation center, where it was more or less a bunch of young folks who loved Jesus, loved warning people about God's impending judgment, and loved saving sexy time until marriage. But this didn't last long. Deborah Davis is the founder's eldest daughter, an ex-member who wrote about her experience in The Children of God, The Inside Story. According to Deborah, it didn't take long before her father would announce himself as God's end-time prophet, and to use his newfound role to make some dramatic changes in his household. By the early 70s, Berg had rechristened himself as Moses David, or Mo for short. And some of these prophetic highlights include leaving his wife for his 20-something mistress and attempting to trick his daughter into sleeping with him. David Berg was a cult leader with severe sexual immorality, and all this was justified under the umbrella of God's love. Berg's new insight about sex, his law of love, he says, comes directly from the Lord. To the pure, all things are pure, as long as they are done in love. He will use his rationale to do just about anything he desires. By 1972, the image of the wholesome, Jesus-loving commune would be dismantled, earning the reputation of the sex cult of the 80s within a decade. What Berg did, plain and simple, was use the word of God to justify his own desires. But it can be argued that this was a learned behavior, taking a page straight from Mama Berg's book. The same Mama Berg who spent her final years ministering to those at Huntington Beach turns out to have been a fraudster herself. Her granddaughter writes about how she was devastated to learn that her grandmother's miraculous healing was all a hoax. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Was that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, sure, Virginia did lie about her miraculous healing, but she didn't hurt anyone, right? And while we'll never know the truth about why Virginia would lie, it did have the consequence of teaching a young David Berg that the end justifies the means. As Deborah writes, the use of Christianity as a tool to advance not only the gospel, but one's own personality and personal goals, to build one's fame, popularity, and notoriety, is a subversion of truth. Eventually, a person will reap what he has sown, and the history of the children of God bears stark testimony to this truth. The next 15 years of the family's history were controversial, to say the least. Up until 1973, the Children of God was a very poor organization. To raise funds, the family had begun a new fundraising and witnessing operation by selling Mo letters, which are essentially David Berg's ramblings, but with illustrations. This wasn't a small operation either. At one point in 1976, they even sold 68 million pieces of literature, and quite a bit of these were spicy. But compared to what was to come, the Mo letters were a small fry, or should I say, small fish? I'm talking record high membership, hundreds of thousands of souls saved, thanks to Flirty Fishing. Flirty Fishing, or FFing, was implemented in 1974, and I can't really mince words here, it was sex work for Jesus. This coincided with the group's exodus from the United States, where the organization developed a palatable international presence. By the family's internal records, over 200,000 fish had their souls saved by love, which is bigger than Santa Monica and Albany combined. What you need to take away from this period of the family from 1974 to 1987 is that it made them a lot of money and gave them a lot of babies.
One, two, three.
Fast forward to the 80s, and a mixture of bad publicity and the AIDS crisis were catching up to the family in a bad way. With the Flirty Fishing funds drying up, they needed to find a lucrative cash cow, and fast. Akin to Mo letters, where the family was essentially repackaging their doctrine to sell to the public, they would do the same again, but in VHS. Enter Kiddie Viddie. Kiddie Viddie was only one of many pieces of media released by the family, and while it's a dwarf by comparison, it is one of the more enduring pieces released from that era. And its predecessor is Music with Meaning. Music with Meaning was filmed in Europe in the early 80s, and while it never became a cash cow like Kiddie Viddie would be, it does have its purpose in the story. Mainly that there were a few songs originally played in Music with Meaning that would reappear in Kiddie Viddie, like these.
Where would we be? Where would we be? Where would we be? Where would we be without love? Where would we be without the stars in the sky? Where would we be without the birds that fly? Where would we be? Where would we be without love?
And this isn't unusual by any means. The family has a history of recycling different media they've produced, and yeah, like just about everyone does to an extent. Recycling isn't the issue. What blurs the boundaries is what they've recycled may have been better left in the past or completely forgotten. Music with Meaning was directly implicated as being a corrupt set rife with sexual abuse against children. And I know this because it was referenced extensively in the judgment of Lord Justice Ward. This was a custody case from the UK in the 90s, and it caused quite a stir since the Lord Justice Ward directly named the abusers in his 295-page document. One of which was Jeremy Spencer, also known as an original member of Fleetwood Mac. He was a prolific musician within the group, where he not only wrote and performed original songs, but had his children prominently featured in Music with Meaning. The judgment accuses him of sexually abusing his daughter, sexually abusing David Berg's granddaughter before she was 13, and describes Music with Meaning as a particularly corrupt and corrupting organization. Jeremy Spencer played a central part in it. We know two things for certain. One is that the blonde girl's named Mary Berg, and that she was abused by Spencer and other men who produced the show. And 2, Spencer wrote the song. I guess a modern-day equivalent would be rebooting The Cosby Show using R. Kelly for the opening theme. And speaking of recycling content, you know what else is recycled? Kiddie Viddie, the name itself. During my research, I discovered an earlier use of the name Kiddie Viddie. The first documented use of the name appeared in 1982 in Tetchy's life story as Kiddie Viddie with a Y instead of an IE. And the original use of Kiddie Viddie was used to describe a toddler giving a striptease to David Berg. My instinct is to say that it's insidious to reuse music from a production filled with rampant abuse and to reuse a name that was used to describe soft CP. Especially when it's done in the middle of a PR campaign where they're trying to distance themselves from the family of love, sex cult of the 80s reputation. Or was this a matter of hubris? What was Berg and his inner circle thinking to believe a wholesome rebrand is enough to remove themselves from a decade of this? Or the third and more likely reason for recycling content is that they were scrapped for time. If you were a full-time family member and worked your way up the system, then your reward could be a desk at World Services, otherwise known as WS. In 2005, a group of researchers were given unprecedented access to visit 23 family homes to observe life in WS. And the chief task of WS was to publish and disseminate to family homes Berg's visions and revelations, as well as other religious materials. No more normie missionary activities like singing to tourists or FFing. You'd be awarded with living where you work, 6-day work weeks, and $25 a month for personal spending. There's no W-2s or 401ks. Your reward is the sweet embrace of Christ. And it's under WS, where Kiddie Viddie was born. Kiddie Viddie was filmed and produced in Japan under the WS umbrella. Mo letters reveal that David Berg saw yen signs in Japan due to its rapidly expanding economy in the 80s. It didn't take long before some wealthy Japanese benefactors gifted him a compound in Tateyama, Japan. Called the 21st Century International School, or Heavenly City School in the Chiba Prefecture, it was the largest and most well-known of the family homes. Not only was it the site where Kiddie Viddie was filmed, but it was also a teen camp for second-generation family members and a detention camp for detractors. But it wasn't actually a school, at least not an officially registered educational facility in Japan. The Heavenly City schools attracted a lot of attention from the public, and much of this expose comes from an investigation series released by Shukan Bunshin in the early 80s, which I liken as the Japanese equivalent of Time magazine. When I was researching for this video essay, I saw these articles were cited frequently, but I couldn't find any reproductions online. Turns out, the original articles were never released online and required ordering them from the National Diet Library as paper photocopies in the original language. It seems like a bit of effort to order, pay, and translate these articles, but someone had to do it. Honestly, a whole other video can be made from just what's revealed in these investigations. But the two biggest takeaways from these articles is that it confirmed that video was the biggest source of funding from the family, and that child labor laws were violated in Japan. These articles don't explicitly state how child labor laws were violated, but it suggests that it was primarily done by having kids perform missionary work with adults. And by missionary work, I mean selling VHS tapes. So, similar to how your elementary school might have held a fundraiser for you to peddle the world's best chocolate to neighbors and family, the family used a similar door-to-door tactic. WS would contact family homes across the globe to forget the sheets, but hit the streets with Kiddie Viddie. Each tape originally sold between 40 or 80 USD and came included with its box, VHS, and corresponding songbook. They also came in a set of several languages, including Japanese, Spanish, and Portuguese. At 25 minutes each, Kiddie Viddie was marketed as being the series that's an alternative to the drugs, violence, and crime in today's television. So, I think to reach the crux of this conversation, Kiddie Viddie has to be looked at from two different perspectives, which is the perspectives of the creators and the audience. We'll start with the creators first. To recap, we've covered the family's doctrine developed by Berg, which emphasized a disdain of the system, the end times, and love. All in the name of Jesus. Kiddie Viddie directly reflects the family's doctrine, but in a kid-friendly manner. While there are a variety of themes, for this video I'll highlight the top 5 that I've identified after watching every single Kiddie Viddie, and then corresponded with the song that exemplifies that theme the most. So, let's get started. First is Quacky the Duck from The Magic Painter. It's about a boy and his friendship with his duck. And I really like this song for the most part. I think it's catchy and love the bond between the boy and duck. They're best friends, and Quacky even waits for him after school each day for the boy to tell him his little secrets. And the song is all fun and games until this part.
One day my dear duck Quacky got sick, and though I tried to make him feel better, my little Quacky died.
Yeah, they killed the duck. I'm laughing now, but I'm more desensitized since I've seen this dozens of times. Look, this song isn't sad because they kill off Quacky. I ask you to pay attention to the subtext. Notice how the song doesn't change its tune. It may briefly slow down, but then it goes back to its upbeat tempo. The boy doesn't even mourn the death of his best friend, his vessel, for telling his most precious secrets to. The boy's singing builds until the final bridge of the song, where he imagines Quacky playing up in heaven. And I quote, "I'll be with him there someday." Quacky the Duck exemplifies our first theme, the glorification of the afterlife. The family is no stranger to imagining themselves in heaven. Big Daddy Berg would frequently publish his own visions of heaven and what the afterlife would be, but with a spicy and ancestral flair. So why not create a G-rated version to encourage kids to imagine their inevitable demise? I mean, afterlife. Notice how the boy is fantasizing about heaven and its newest resident, Quacky. You know who else is in heaven with Quacky? The little farm boy. Not as an adult or an old man, but as his child self with our dearly departed duck. You could argue that this romanticizes death for kids. After all, death expedites your next play date with Quacky. I rest my case. Exhibit A, the glorification of the afterlife. Two, joyful obedience. Authority. Ever heard of her? If you're a product of Kiddie Viddie, then she's your bestie, headmistress, and purveyor of all decision-making. The concept of teaching children to listen to adults isn't out of place in a kid's show. And I think these types of songs can be useful teaching tools and are the basis for many nursery rhymes. But the family is playing two different tunes here. One is their anti-establishment roots from the 60s, and the other is an enthusiastic love for authoritarianism. I mean, it's a cult for a reason. Couple that with knowing that at the time of Kiddie Viddie's release, many family homes were coming under scrutiny from the law for sexually abusing children, among other offenses. This knowledge makes it difficult to disassociate the child-friendly message of joyful and blind obedience to the family's abusive practices from that era. By 1988, the family had publicly denounced and ceased the practice of sexually abusing minors. But what I can't help but think is that there is an overlap between the 1989 release of Kiddie Viddie and the denouncement a year before, making it probable that the child actors and singers on screen could have been victims. Do It 'Cause Daddy Says So is from Let's Be Friends, and is the epitome of joyful and blind obedience. A little girl laments about her daddy telling her to do things like brushing her teeth or taking a nap. She doesn't always understand, and it doesn't matter, because she has to do it anyway. And the chorus sums it up best with trust, obey, and do it because daddy says so. 3. Happy all the time. Ever felt sad? Shame. Feeling anything other than happy is a sin, so you better act like you're physically incapable of developing any complex emotions, or else. I gotta be honest, there really isn't much to say about this one because it's pretty straightforward. Throughout the family's history, they sang a lot of songs and seemed like one big happy commune from the outside. But why not be happy on a ship? Happy on a Congo line? Or happy in a marching band? But sometimes, you don't need other costumes and fanfare, but can coordinate outfits with your besties and hash out some altruism. I can get behind that. But for the semantics police out there, not every song about emotions is about happiness in Kiddie Viddie. There's one that's more relatable, about feeling like your voice is so small that it'll never be heard. That you're just a speck of dust among an expanding universe. That song in particular has a twinge of the glorification of the afterlife. Sweet, sweet afterlife. Four, God is omnipresent and all-powerful. It's a bit obvious how this theme ties to the family's doctrine, given that they're a Christian organization. This titular song behind the eponymous VHS, The Magic Painter, isn't the most threatening or strangest song, but it is illustrative. God controls the brush, and God is responsible for all, and He's never taken His eyes from your naughty self, not even for a second. As an honorable mention, I also have to give credit to the Sun song from Happy All the Time, because it opens with listing how many ways we would die without the sun, such as
Without the light of the sun, we'd be in total darkness. Without the heat from the sun, we'd just freeze to death. Without the rays of the sun, there'd be no food, we'd die of hunger. Without the sun's gravity, we'd go wandering off in space.
This paints the sun to be a pretty powerful force. But you know what's even more powerful? God. And He's watching you. And 5, the Lamentation of the Cross. Okay, so there are other themes I could have taken this slot, but I had to choose this one because it's a personal favorite. Technically, only one song encapsulates this theme, and it's the clown from The Magic Painter. Now, when I say the clown, what are you picturing? A man putting on his clown outfit and performing in a circus? Well, don't strain yourself too much because that's exactly the premise of the clown. But similar to the Sun song, this isn't just about our solar system, and the clown isn't just about the life of a carny. The protagonists of these songs are representations of something else much more profound, which is the clown acting as an allegory for Christ Himself. And I'm being completely serious. And before you think I'm daft, there's evidence to support this claim. First, the clown is a performer, but a selfless performer who spreads the word of love and happiness like butter on hot toast, much like Christ. And he does this so successfully that the clown inspires the disciple to step forward and exude the same radiance. Then, the clown crucifies himself. And it's no accident because he crucifies himself a second time. Aren't convinced? See this cloaked man? That's Jesus talking to the matching besties from Happiness on their version of the Sermon on the Mount. And in the same dreamlike sequence, the cloaked Jesus is replaced by no one other than the clown. The Lamentation of the Cross is a burden to hold, but not for this clown. While these themes are not exhaustive, I think they get the job done to give an overview of what the series is about. And to recap, it's the glorification of the afterlife, joyful obedience, happy all the time. God is omnipresent and all-powerful, and the Lamentation of the Cross, which go hand in hand with the doctrine of the family. So, how was this appeal extended to its audience? Easy. Kiddie Viddie was designed to be a family-friendly Christian entertainment alternative for audiences, like VeggieTales. It also wasn't overbearing with its religious message, making it appealing even for audiences who aren't intentionally seeking out a Christian piece of media, like VeggieTales. Internal family reports state that there were kids who spent hundreds of hours watching Kiddie Viddie, and while it may seem comical to think that a piece of media that now seems low budget by our modern standards could be captivating, I kind of get it. In fact, I was one of those kids who'd watch Kiddie Viddie for hours. Don't believe me?
Canta la de Happiness.
Happiness, happiness, make it happy. Happiness, happiness, make be.
Surprise! I was a Kiddie Viddie kid. More specifically, I was a magic painter enjoyer. And before you ask, no, my family was not associated with the children of God in any way. We were just part of an unassuming audience, like when your mom picked out VeggieTales instead of Shark Tale at Blockbuster. My abuela bought this for my cousins and I, and she didn't have cable and owned about 3 VHS tapes, one of which was The Magic Painter. So that's how we spent long days at abuela's house. Kiddie Viddie on repeat. And while researching for this video, I asked her where she got a copy, and she just said a church lady sold it to her one afternoon. So why would my abuela or anyone else buy this stuff? Peer pressure can only go so far, but eventually it has to stand on its own merits. And I agree that to an extent, Kiddie Viddie succeeds in that it's entertaining on its own. The family documented many testimonials that would quote customers on what they loved about Kiddie Viddie and of its international impact. This wasn't a series that you could find at a local Blockbuster, but required direct interaction with a family member to get your hands on a copy. And it was designed that way because it wasn't only used for fundraising, but it also served as a witnessing tool. So I read a lot of these testimonials, and they make a pretty convincing argument for Kiddie Viddie. For the viewer's entertainment, I'll summarize my favorite accounts of Kiddie Viddie saving souls, and for a dramatic effect, I'll say it backwards. In third place, one testimonial describes how some members set up a stand somewhere in Latin America to play tapes to the public so they can sample the product. They noticed one 18-year-old girl stopping by each day to watch them for hours. One day, these members witnessed to her, and she quickly became a live-out member who is hungry for the words of David. She is fruit of the Kiddie Viddie. In second place, Kiddie Viddie made it into the screen of the highest office in the land of the free. That's right, folks. The family reported that George H.W. Bush himself played Kiddie Viddie on Air Force One. But H.W. didn't just have one copy of Kiddie Viddie, but 2. Allegedly, he held his second copy against the window of his limousine to show it off to the kids who gave it to him, and he pressed his nose against the glass to make a clown's face. The testimonial states that this moment was filmed, but I couldn't find any footage, so you're just gonna have to make do with this dramatic reenactment. And in first place, this title alone is gold. 3-year-old delivered from Thriller's evil hold. This testimonial is a bit long, so here's a summary. A mother accidentally let her toddler watch Thriller and became obsessed with Michael Jackson and the influences of the demonic music video. The toddler was able to withdraw from Thriller with Kiddie Viddie, and the mother was so thankful to the home that sold her Kiddie Viddie that she broke down and cried. It was convicting and sobering for us to see how the devil is spreading his propaganda to even the littlest children. Yeah. Just imagine the horror of having your 3-year-old watch some camp zombies duke it out on the dance floor. They also aren't too dissimilar since both music videos had accused pedophiles behind the making, so what difference does it make? Honorable mentions are that some homes would host Kiddie Viddie parties in the same vein as a Tupperware or any other MLM candle whatever party, and that some local TV stations broadcasted family-branded propaganda, meaning that Kiddie Viddie could have broadcasted on your local television from Argentina to Bulgaria. For audiences, Kiddie Viddie was kind of a hit. But this was happening congruently during a PR nightmare. During the period Kiddie Viddie was sold, there were notable raids happening across the globe where kids were rescued from family homes. There was heightened public scrutiny with journalists exposing the family's worst exploits. And this.
And I was ordered in the group to have sex with a 10-year-old.
Remember him? His name was Rick Dupuy, and this was from his appearance on Larry King Live in 1993. This infamous clip happens towards the end of his interview, but if we rewind it just a bit, he tells us this.
But basically what was my wake-up call was I was in Japan, where I had been summoned by the group to start a video ministry or an audio-visual production unit.
Remember when I said World Services was the branch of the family that created its media content? Well, I did leave a detail out. It technically wasn't WS that produced Kiddie Viddie, but International Video Ministry, which is a subgroup of WS. Dupuy is also known by a pseudonym, The Watchman, which he wrote under in his public expose of the family's abuses in his 15 years in the organization. Now, this is the part that I lingered in the most during my research, mostly because I felt touched and conflicted about Dupuy's story. Here was a man who sacrificed his family, his livelihood, and the only thing he's ever known for most of his adult life to speak out against the unjust practices of the children of God. And the Larry King interview left me wondering if he was behind Kiddie Viddie's creation. Something strange about Kiddie Viddie that I haven't mentioned before are its credits, or lack thereof. In every single tape, this portion rolls up, followed by an advertisement for more Kiddie Viddie. When I'd watched The Magic Painter repeatedly as a kid, I remember being mesmerized that there existed more VHS and wish I could have had him. Looking back at this as an adult, what sticks out to me is the absence of credits. There are no names attributed to Kiddie Viddie, leaving it a mystery as to who was behind its production. This held so many implications of whether the adults behind its making could have been abusers themselves. That is until I received my copy of Christmas Joy I ordered for research. What makes Christmas Joy different than my other copies is that it was a DVD. When I reached a familiar drum roll to signal the end of the tapes, I noticed something different. There were credits, and none about Dupuy. So this is where my tinfoil hat comes in, and I began to conspire if the family rewrote Kiddie Viddie's history. The original VHS was released when Dupuy was still a member, and by its re-release over a decade later, he had already left. My theory is that the family replaced Dupuy's name with his former protege, Roberto Fernandez, otherwise known as Solomon Costa Rica or Uncle Jim. He's a prominent family member who appeared in interviews defending the organization and worked in front and behind the cameras on other kid-friendly but family-produced media productions. So was Dupuy erased from family history? Did they replace his name with Roberto Fernandez? With a hunch, I scrambled to prove that Dupuy was the real creator of Kiddie Viddie. I searched every nugget I could find on ex-COG websites and even went as far as to discover his first whistleblowing account all the way from Japan. Look familiar? And with every lead that I found, it led to a dead end, only filling my mind with more sordid details of abuse and scandal from the family. Except I found one last lead in the most unexpected of places: Wikipedia. Under the former family members section, one name stood out: Tina Dupuy, Rick's niece. Tina was born into the organization and left at a young age to become a stand-up comedian and journalist. And in 2018, she produced a podcast called Cultish to explore the complicated relationship that is her uncle and the circumstances she was born into. Needless to say, the podcast is complex and thought-provoking as she explores her family's background. And although Cultish never finished its first season, I recommend listening to it. Something I've been cognizant of throughout writing this video is that I didn't want to talk about cults in a sensationalized manner. I don't need to be the 1,000th person to publicly denounce the Children of God, David Berg, or even Rick Dupuy. My goal is to tell a story and retain what makes it human. The people who join cults aren't inherently inhumane, and we're all susceptible to falling for fanatic language and its subsequent behavior. As I said in the beginning, cults exist on a spectrum, and for the people involved in the Children of God, they gradually found themselves in an organization pushing into the destructive qualities of a cult. Rick Dupuy is one of these many stories, and we only have access to his voice and his words to an extent. He committed suicide in 1996. I'll never be able to confirm with him if he was a creative Kiddie Viddie, but I have the next best thing. Tina. I reached out to her to ask about her uncle and received this as a response. I won't read it all out loud, but what it does confirm is that the safe answer to say is that yes, Rick was involved in Kiddie Viddie to some extent. So was the creator Rick, Roberto, a combination? Neither? I don't think I'll ever know, and I think this is as far as my research into this story will go. There's more I want to ask and investigate, but if I keep going, then this video will never be finished. And since you're watching it now, this is my extent. There's only so much a girl with an internet connection can do. After all this, what's next? This video has taken up an exorbitant amount of my time, and none of it would have been possible without the efforts of former members. They've painstakingly documented Mo letters, announcements, and even digital reproductions of family-only books. So I couldn't have done it without xfamily.org and xfamily.org. My original concept of this video was just to do some Jenny Nicholson type of commentary on the songs from Kiddie Viddie, a la Church Play Cinematic Universe style. And instead I ended up with a story that seemed to balloon the more I researched. And to reiterate, this is an incomplete story, but is my best effort with the resources at hand. For now, my journey with Kiddie Viddie is over. I'll be donating material I've gathered to the James T. Richardson New Religious Movements collection, so future researchers can have access to the material I've accumulated to create this deep dive into Kiddie Viddie. This is only one small segment of the family's history, and if you're curious for more, check out the many other creators and investigators who have delved into this topic from different angles. What I hope is that I've given a perspective that is nuanced and comprehensive to a story that is difficult to tell. And with that, I sincerely thank you for watching, and to subscribe for my next rabbit hole.